Thank you for tuning in to our fiction segment of Effect to Change. Imagination allows for an escape from reality, or a different view of it. You'll find links to the original author's work and their profiles in the description. There are a lot of stories to come, so be sure to hit those subscribe and bell buttons so you don't miss any of them. Some of the stories will be a part of a series, and you won't want to miss out. Don't forget to share and comment, and your support is always appreciated. Today's story is titled Sorcerer, Chapter 1, Adventure Awaits, and was written by J.F. Danskin. Adventure Awaits. I can't believe that more of them didn't want to skip lessons, said Alcar. Adventure awaits! Standing outside the walls of Katrisberg, Alcar looked at the pair of local youths that had responded to his invitation, each dressed in drab canvas clothes. Like himself, both were 18 years of age and were in the final year of their studies. At this hour in the morning, they should have all been in class. Instead, Alcar had decided that a trip to the Great Swamp was well overdue. After all, he told himself, he had what it takes to be a famous adventurer, and a leader, too. It was no surprise that Sprig had shown up, at least, for he always did what Alcar asked. The youth had long black hair and olive-colored skin, and he was large and muscular with a deep, booming voice. But despite looking the part of a warrior, Alcar knew that Sprig was both a weakling and a complete coward. Hopefully he at least looked intimidating enough to frighten off any goblins or lizard men that might be lurking on the fringes of the swamp. In one hand, Sprig held a staff, or rather a large straight stick, and he was currently biting at the fingernails of the other. The third member of their company was a relative stranger to them all, a girl by the name of Olinka, who had recently moved to Katrisberg from an outlying village. She was a slim, attractive young woman with curly auburn hair and seemed cautiously friendly. Unlike the others, it had taken no persuasion from Alcar to get her to cut class. As such, it was clear that she was no fan of bookwork, and she had brought a bashed-looking shortbow with her. In short, she was easily the more promising of the two recruits to Alcar's company. "Well," said Sprig, pulling his fingers from his mouth and glancing sideways at Olinka, "this could be fun, but aren't you worried we'll get in trouble for missing class?" Olinka glanced around at him and shrugged. "What do you want to do? Go back?" Sprig looked towards the open city gates. "We could wait until later." "I hope you're joking me, hero," said Olinka with a grin, whacking Sprig across the back with one hand. "We should leave now, before the city guard decide to question us." "She's right," said Alcar, turning and beginning to lead the way southwards on the main road out of Katrisberg, passing by an inbound merchant wagon. "Nobody's going back to the city, not empty-handed. We have to stay together now, and work as a team for the whole mission, if you want to get back alive, that is." "Alive? I'm not sure I like this," grumbled Sprig, but he followed along behind Olinka as they began to walk away from the city gates. "So, what's our quest, leader?" asked Olinka, falling in beside Alcar. "The quest, yeah," he paused. In truth, Alcar hadn't really thought through what they would do when they actually reached the swamp. Though visible from the Katrisberg city walls, very few people actually ventured there, and those who did were regarded with suspicion. It was known to be the home of semi-civilized lizard folk, and worse. And since hunting the lizards had been outlawed, the main function of the swamp was to form a massive, hard-to-navigate area cutting Katrisberg off from almost every other center of civilization in the Empire. "We're on a mission, of course," he said at last. "Searching for treasure." "But what exactly are we looking for?" "The Great Swamp. he said, pointing ahead, is a vast quagmire of Alcar, she cut in, nudging him hard in the ribs with one elbow. I know what the swamp is. I'm not a city kid, remember? Right. So, what is the plan when we arrive? She persisted. Alcar was suddenly acutely aware that going to the swamp for an adventure would sound pretty lame. Childish. He had to think of a better cover story than that. Well, I'll show you when we get there, he added hastily, recalling a story he had once heard from his father. But I have heard from a scout that has been in the area that there is a half-blind goblin with a pot full of silver. It should be easy loot. From a scout? Or a drunk at your local tavern? Asked Alinka. But then she laughed loudly and seemed content to proceed without an answer to her last question. Soon the main road from the city gate turned eastward as it headed towards the nearest major city, Dothmere. The three adventurers' way lay straight ahead in the direction of the swamp, through an area dominated by fields of corn, rocks, and hillocks. We leave the road here, said Alcar, excitement shining in his eyes as he looked ahead, knowing they were now well clear of the city walls and the guards that could potentially arrest youths that they perceived as troublemakers. Past these fields and farms, and then headed west towards the village of Rockspawn. And from there, adventure! Cried Alinka. Yep, glory and hopefully treasure, Alcar replied. We're going to be back for lunch, right? Said Sprig from behind. But the other pair didn't answer. With a rumbling sigh, Sprig carried on walking. Soon, Alinka took the lead, striding confidently forward on the small trail that led alongside a wooden farm fence. They had passed the first field of corn and were now going past some damp-looking goats that stood in a marshy and rocky field. Wooden farm buildings and a wagon could be seen further off. The land had been sloping down for the entire way, and it was clear that while the swamp was still a half mile ahead, the going was soon going to get very wet underfoot. Do you know how to use that thing, Alinka? Asked Alcar, walking just at her shoulder. What, this bow? Uh-huh. Well, as it happens, yes, I do. I grew up in a forest village, a place called Lorne. Everyone there learns to shoot. That's a relief, he chuckled. I didn't like to rely on Sprig with his quarterstaff for our defense. She may be able to shoot, said Sprig gladly from the back, but I notice she doesn't have any arrows. Alinka stopped walking, turning and then putting her hands on her hips. Well spotted, Sprig. It's true. My father picked up this bow after a gang of goblins raided Lorne. She unslung it from her shoulder, then twanged at the string a few times. It was broken. My dad restrung it for me, and it does work, I promise. But with no arrows, began Alcar. Well, I don't see you carrying any weapons. Alcar raised the simple canvas smock that covered his torso to reveal a leather belt. Tucked inside it, without a sheath, was a partially rusted iron knife. He now pulled this out and held it out to her. The blade was around 4 inches long. Have a look if you like. Ew, no thanks. It's been in your pants. Sprig chuckled, but Alcar just shrugged. Fair point, Alinka, but at least I can actually do some damage. How are you going to defend yourself without arrows? I'll think of something, she replied, turning on her heel and starting to walk again. The morning was getting brighter now, but a mist had settled over the land ahead, meaning that the hillocks and towers that dotted the swamp far ahead of them appeared to pop up from nowhere. Closer by, a cluster of wooden outhouses, all looking half-rotted, flanked the path ahead. And beyond? A sloping area of sandy ground gave way to a great many rotten stumps and long, unfamiliar-looking reeds. Beyond was what looked like a small lake, but that it was completely covered in lily leaves and green scum. Around 20 yards in, rocks and earthy mounds rose up, but rather than marking the edge of the lake, they were more like stepping stones. The swamp, Alcar knew, extended for dozens of miles, and this was only the start. "We're here!" said Alcar with excitement. "Good," said Sprig. "Surely this is far enough. I'm getting hungry." "Come on, big guy," said Alinka, slapping his arm. "Adventure awaits, right? And we can catch something to eat." "What? Really?" Sprig peered uncertainly ahead, gripping his staff tightly. She sniffed and looked around. "And besides, this looks amazing. It's been years since I've been this close." Yeah, me too," lied Alcar. In truth, he had only been out of the poor quarter of Kotchersberg and never to the swamp. Now that he was here, he didn't much like the look or smell of it. "Imagine living here," said Sprig with a shudder, looking around at the farm buildings behind them. "It would suck, right?" said Alinka with a grin, now holding her bow out at arm's length as if to line up a shot. "But on the other hand, great hunting. Imagine. I bet there are alligators that sneak up here. You could plug them with an arrow and BAM! They're good to eat, you know." "Yes, they are," said Alcar, though he had only read about alligator meat and never tasted it himself. "Real tasty. And good with ale." Sprig looked at his friend, eyes narrowed. "Have you ever tasted ale, Alcar?" Alinka began to walk along the edge of the marshy water. "Come on! There's more to explore. I wonder if we'll see a lizardman." "I really think this is far enough," said Sprig. Alcar looked at her receding back for a moment and then grabbed at Sprig's sleeve. "Come on, dude," he said after a pause. "Just a few more minutes. It'll be fun. You'll see. Besides, I'm pretty sure it's safe here. So close to the..." Alcar didn't finish his sentence. However, for just then, off to his left and in the opposite direction as Alinka had gone, he spotted an enormous alligator, at least twice as long and wide as a tall man, and it was now cutting off the route back towards the city. If you enjoyed this story, show your support to the writer by following the links in the description and sharing it with your friends. Support for this channel is also appreciated.